Hello, this is Sarah Braasch. Welcome back to my channel. So I want to do a video about how CAREN acts, which are, I've talked about this before, it's sort of a really brazen, unconstitutional new form of hate crime legislation. And I want to talk about how these are grossly unconstitutional bills of attainder. So what is a bill of attainder? So a bill of attainder, which is explicitly listed as being grossly unconstitutional, in the U.S. Constitution, they are when a legislative body legislates that someone is a criminal, instead of allowing them their constitutional fair trial protections, due process, and equal protection of the law. It's when a legislative body legislates that a citizen of the United States is a criminal. That is a grossly unconstitutional bill of attainder. So why am I saying that these CAREN acts are grossly unconstitutional bills of attainder? Well, they are, and I do want to clarify that the text of the explicit text, final text of these CAREN acts are facially neutral. They don't name specific persons, of course. Okay, so that is true. But just like when we're talking about we talk about how the text of a law can be facially neutral with respect to a lot of issues, with respect to, discrimination. But even though the text is facially on its face neutral, that's not the end of the conversation, right? In terms of our jurisprudence. So that's not the end of the conversation here either. And I have been explicitly and specifically named more or less as a white nationalist terrorist in the proposals for CAREN acts in state legislatures and municipal legislatures across the U.S. And so that means that I am named and part of the official legislative history for CAREN acts in state legislatures across the U.S. So that's what makes it, in my mind, a bill of attainder. And then we see another piece of proof that these are unconstitutional bills of attainder, because journalists and legislators both are calling New York State's CAREN Act the Amy Cooper bill, after the white woman who called 911, Amy Cooper, in Central Park, when she had a verbal altercation with a black man who was bird watching in Central Park. And Amy Cooper, of course, was the white woman who didn't have her dog on a leash. And I've done other videos about that, but just that's who that is. So it's very clear. That is a very, very clear instance where it's very obvious that the New York State's CAREN Act is a grossly unconstitutional bill of attainder, because it's actually being referred to as the Amy Cooper Act by New York State legislators. Now, I just want to know that the first iteration of this bill, which wasn't passed, this is the second iteration of this bill. The first iteration of this bill was introduced by then New York State Senator Jesse Hamilton, and he explicitly named me, and he explicitly cited me in the fake news press, all over the press, as the impetus for that it wasn't called a CAREN Act at that time, but it was a CAREN Act, and I was explicitly cited and named by New York State Senator Jesse Hamilton as the impetus for that bill. So that was also a grossly unconstitutional bill of attainder. So that's why I'm saying that these CAREN Acts are grossly unconstitutional bills of attainder. And so maybe technically they aren't, but the spirit of these CAREN Acts, they are. Because they are naming people, innocent people. And that's also why I consider these CAREN Acts to be part of the Living While Black race hoax, which has been turned into a blood sport by charlatans and frauds like New York State Senator Jesse Hamilton, like San Francisco Municipal, I'm not sure what they call them there, a councilman or something like that, Shaman Walton, who is the one who introduced and pushed for the CAREN Act in San Francisco. So I lost my train of thought. But anyway, so these are grossly unconstitutional bills of attainder, and darn it, I lost my train of thought. It's getting a little late, and I'm a little tired, so I lost my train of thought. But that's basically what I wanted to say, and that's why I refer to them as such, and that's what a bill of attainder is. So that's where I remember what I was talking about. So that's why I consider these CAREN Acts, which are brazenly unconstitutional hate crime legislation, to be part of the Living While Black race hoax from 2018, 2019, 2020. And I was saying that it was turned into a blood sport by charlatans and frauds like Jesse Hamilton, like Shaman Walton, targeting vulnerable white women like myself, innocent, vulnerable white women like myself with mental health disabilities were the ones being targeted, were the ones who are the victims of these Living While Black race and hate crime hoaxes. And I refer now to the Living While Black race hoax of 2018 and 2019 and now 2020, revived in 2020, following Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd's killings and the shooting of Jacob Blake. And so I refer to this phenomenon as the Great Racism Scare of 2018 and 2019. And of course, I was one of the early victims of the Living While Black race hoax at this point, and I consider all these CAREN Acts to be part of the Living While Black race hoax being perpetrated by the Democrats, specifically to smear Donald Trump and to get him out of office. And I'm going to guess now that, the Biden administration is going to be implemented, I'm just going to take a wild guess, and I don't think that this is crazy. We're not going to see any more of these ridiculously unconstitutional CAREN Acts being promulgated in state municipal legislatures across the U.S. I'm just guessing, but I think that now that Joe Biden's going to be, it seems very likely, in all likelihood, Joe Biden's going to be inaugurated as the next president of the United States. And so the Democrats don't need to promulgate these CAREN Acts to smear Trump anymore. So we're not going to see the same sort of, voracious appetite for these CAREN Acts. But anyway, so that's what I wanted to do a video on. And I do consider in spirit these CAREN Acts. And I am part of the legislative history. I'm a part of the official legislative history in state legislatures across the U.S., basically named as a white nationalist terrorist. And I am a well-documented and lifelong human and civil rights activist and licensed attorney. So if this can happen to me, it can happen to literally anyone. This can happen to you. You can be the subject of grossly unconstitutional bills of attainder promulgated in state legislatures across the U.S., and New York State Senator Jesse Hamilton can go in the fake news press and call you a white nationalist terrorist. This can happen to you. If it can happen to me, it can happen to you, and that should terrify absolutely everyone. I don't want this video to get too long, so I'm going to wrap it up. I'll have my PayPal me and GoFundMe links below, and my fundraising link for my awesome attorneys, Randazza Legal Group. Just put Sarah Braasch in the reference line. Okay, thank you so much. I'll talk to you later. Bye.